In 1944, Elie Wiesel and his family were imprisoned in both Auschwitz and Buchenwald. His family was murdered in those concentration camps. Brutalized by Nazis, Wiesel somehow managed to survive. The man saw the most unbelievable horrors and suffered tremendously. After being rescued by American soldiers, Wiesel was shocked to discover that they and most of the world were completely oblivious to the atrocities taking place there in Germany. Wiesel had hoped that this event was the wake-up call that the world needed to end such hatred and violence. But the second half of the 20th century saw no such change. The world continued to be wrought with racial and religious intolerance, political unrest, genocide, and war. Dismayed by this, Wiesel addresses how remaining apathetic is no better than being part of the problem. Indifference is inhumane, and sometimes silence speaks louder than violence. It is understandable, though, why people choose indifference. Apathy is tempting because it is safe and it is easy. It allows one to remain sheltered in their comfy, cozy lives. And after all, why should you be burdened by somebody else's pain? Why should your life be interrupted by someone else's suffering? But for those suffering, they feel abandoned and forgotten. And in the midst of this suffering, such insult to injury places them in a dimension far worse than hell. As Wiesel said, not to respond to their plight, not to relieve their solitude by offering them a spark of hope, is to exile them from human memory. And in denying their humanity, we betray our own. Indifference, then, is not only a sin, it is a punishment. Coming in at only 93 of the 100 most viewed speeches, I find it disheartening and very telling of the world. It would seem there still exists an issue with giving focus to such an uncomfortable, yet so important of a topic as injustice and human suffering. As we see here now, in this god-awful year of 2020, the world has not much changed. From the individual to the family to community, to right up to the level of society. People choose to turn a blind eye to the evils of the world. When faced with conflict and injustice, people willingly stick their heads into the sand. I do not live in a world of kind, compassionate, justice-seeking people. For the most part, what we have is a world of ostrich, with their cowardness and tiny minds that they stick into the sand. So often people use the excuse, I don't know what to do to help. But that is a cop-out. Unless their brains match the size of those small ostrich brains, they have the intelligence. What they lack is the empathy and the willingness to stand up and fight against injustice and cruelty. And what can I expect when the average person eats such unhealthy foods and surrounds themselves, their children, and their pets with toxic chemicals, ingest pharmaceuticals to no end? They basically pay for their cancer and then cry about the cost to treat it later. How can I ever expect people with no awareness for their own health and life, people with very little self-respect and self-love, to have awareness and compassion on a larger scale? They turn a blind eye to the dangers in their own lives. They trust a corrupt government, mainstream media, and corporate marketing to instruct them on what to eat, what to buy, how to think, how to feel, what to believe. And when they feel something isn't right, they choose to numb themselves with their myriad of vices, be it overworking, excessive TV viewing, sex, drugs, or alcohol. You name it, there is something. But hey, it's 2020, so it's somehow acceptable to dull all of your anxieties. It is acceptable to be numb. The atrocities committed against the Jews were one of the most disturbing and horrific that the world ever saw. And now in 2020, we are faced with one again, this time of a much more insidious nature. Crimes against humanity are unfolding right under our noses as the greatest geopolitical agenda sweeps across the globe, guised in the form of a virus. As our civil liberties are slowly being stripped and people are being primed to willingly relinquish them. As hate groups, disguised as civil rights movements, terrorize the country, and as a megalomaniac eugenicist masquerade as a humanitarian, meanwhile killing and poisoning people, controlling politicians and scientists as they push for forced vaccination of a virus that they created as a means to justify their own sinister end. In 2020, there is not one man leading these atrocities. There is a global network of sick, greedy people. And even worse are the people who are refusing to see this. People choosing to ignore this. When I go out, I no longer see a world of people. I see a world filled with Hitlers and his Nazi soldiers, rounding up all the sheep onto their cattle cars, leading them to their slaughter. Nazis and sheep, a new hybrid of human. And to those who willingly stick their heads into the sand, you are wearing more than a filthy mask across your mouth. You are blindfolded by the calcifications that fill across your eye. How anyone can willingly choose this, I cannot understand. I would rather the awareness of all the suffering and injustice, no matter how awful or uncomfortable it makes me feel, so that I can make a difference, no matter how small that may be. Apathy and inaction to remain solely focused on one's own challenges and desires is cruel and it is selfish. And as Wiesel states so poignantly, indifference is not a response. Indifference is not a beginning, it is an end. And therefore, indifference is always the friend of the enemy, for it benefits the aggressor, never his victim, whose pain is magnified when he or she feels forgotten. The real evil in the world, then, is good people doing nothing.